Hello, everybody. Welcome to ACMP Turkey Change Management Booster Series. The topic of our conversation today is diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm really excited to welcome you, Jennifer. Could you please introduce yourself and then prepare us for this moment?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Rhodes, and I have the honor to be your speaker today for the Change Management Booster Series. For right now, I serve on the board of ACMP Global, and I'm really pleased to be with you here today. During our conversation today, we're going to share some information about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to help prepare you for a change management journey with DEI. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. You should be seeing the screen right now.
Yes, we see.
Wonderful. Again, here's just a little bit about myself. I've been able to work in the field of change management for many years, focused on commercial, federal, nonprofit settings, and been able to also work and volunteer not only for ACMP Global on diversity, equity, and inclusion type activities and initiatives, but also in an educational setting and for a nonprofit as well. I am really pleased, really grateful to be with you today. My best attempt at saying in Turkish thank you is teşekkürler. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And I shared with Duygu and Gizem that my family, my grandparents were born in Turkey. And so for me, it just shortens the distance between us today. It makes me feel like I'm talking to distant cousins over in Turkey. So thank you for having me. Thank you for making me feel welcome in your ACMP Turkey chapter. Sunday was a very interesting day for many of us around the world. And I want to think about this past Sunday because it was a combination of 3 different religions celebrating their holidays. Of course, it is Ramadan, which many of you celebrate in Turkey. It was Easter, which many celebrate here in the US. And it was also Passover. And so I just thought, how wonderful for us to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion after this momentous Sunday. And as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we have to think about and we have to prepare ourselves for this kind of conversation. For several of us, it may make us feel uncomfortable. We may be stretching ourselves, stretching limits. We may be expanding our thinking. And so it's very important that as we enter this conversation, that we enter with an open mind, with a kind heart, with respect, and with understanding. Because what may be one person's personal experience may be very different from someone else's. We may have a very different worldview or different values that we see diversity, equity, and inclusion through. These differences can be as simple as where we were born, whether we had both parents in our lives, what religion we followed, whether we were educated or not, whether we own our homes, we rent, or maybe we had a period in our lives where we were homeless, or maybe we served in the military. Diversity can come in many different forms, even ones that maybe are not visible. We may have hidden disabilities that we don't share with our colleagues as we cope through them. And so we have to enter this conversation with that open mind and with that understanding. The next sort of piece that we need to think about is that DEI is a journey, that it is not, okay, I did these things on this checklist, therefore I have DEI, in our organization or our business, and therefore I'm done. I've finished my DEI journey. It just doesn't happen like that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is on a continuum, and it's something that evolves and that changes and that has sort of a ramp of improvement as you build upon different pieces in your diversity, equity, and inclusion program. It's kind of a never-ending check and done. So I just want to set up today's discussion with some of those thoughts in mind. And also in thinking of some of the differences that we see in the world and in your country as well, specific to Turkey. Many different religions. You have the coming together of East and West. You have Europe, you have Asia, you have people in your country, majority who live in urban settings around big cities, but you still have members of your country who live in rural areas. You have multi-language, multi-ethnic backgrounds that live in Turkey. And so for your chapter specifically, we can think about it along various lines of the diversity of thought and the different types of lenses that we bring into our DEI experience. So first off, we have to define what DEI is. And for our discussion, I chose sort of the broadest definition of DEI. And this comes from Wikipedia. But as you go about thinking of your group and how you want to define diversity, equity, and inclusion, there may be specific nuances that are important for your organization. When I think back to how we developed the diversity, equity, and inclusion statement for ACMP Global, we had to take a world look. We had to think broader than just one region, one nation, one area of the world. So here are some basic definitions around what diversity means, what equity means, and what inclusion includes, what it details out to be. I also want to make a special note here at the bottom. DEI terms are evolving and they're changing and they continue to grow. So your organization may think about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Another organization might think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Another group may think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish and how far your organization can go, how far it's able to build out its DEI program and initiative. So keep that in mind as we go along. So why are we talking about in 2020, there was a series of events that happened specifically in the US, but in which there was a great outpouring that was involved that caused people to rethink, caused people to imagine, to see something different, and to stand up for something different. And so many individuals and organizations said that this was a huge wake-up call to how DEI was important in their work or in their life. It's noted that the search for diversity and inclusion was growing steadily over the past 5 years prior to 2020, but that flashpoint of George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter Now movement in the United States caused it to skyrocket. The exponential search for what is diversity, what is inclusion, how can I get involved, how can I help was something that just took off exponentially in the summer of 2020. Another reason why we're talking about this now is that organizations are hiring chief diversity officers or DEI officers at a greater pace than ever before. I think it's something like 16% increase since 2020. And there are many reasons why companies are doing this. There are many benefits to why we want to think about having a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Some have involved an increase in revenue. Companies that have a diverse management team, according to Boston Consulting, receive something like 19% more revenue, have an increase in revenue because they have that diversity factor. Again, we've seen this global outpouring, this coming together, this call, answering this call. And so many groups are wondering, what can I do? How can my organization address these kinds of issues? How can we build a diversity, equity, and inclusion program? And what makes it a good program? And so I'll share with you a few of the best practices that I've researched, that I've seen in action, and that have proven to help create world-class diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. I call this answering the call. So there's a song from the 80s, 90s called Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. And that's really what we need to do as we're building a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. You need to stop and think. You need to pull together a diverse team, a group that may feel like-minded and compelled to do something, but has that different type of lens, different type of experience that can come together to create this program. And then you really have to listen, open your ears, listen. I say, ask, is your organization ready? Can you do some assessments? Can you evaluate? Can you anticipate what's going on in your organization and how they will react to various initiatives that you're putting in place? Again, what's the business case? What's the why behind this? Not only was it something external, or did something internal in your entity, in your organization happen that you say, now is the time when we have to act. We feel compelled to act. Think about the impact of what it would mean to have that open DEI discussion. What would change? How would people feel differently? Consider your organization's history. What has happened as it relates to DEI? Is it a situation where the company has put forward more women to be on the board, more women executives? Is that something that has progressed in your company in a way that allows you to now go to the next level of DEI? Think about the values, think about the culture that you have. Is it supportive to diversity, equity, inclusion? Or will you meet resistance? Will there be some resistance that you see? Again, each organization, each type of entity will need to determine how far they can go on this DEI path. As I said before, there are many new flavors of DEI that continue to expand and grow as we think about social justice, as we think about being anti-racist, as we think about leveling the playing field so that more people can have access. And so these are things that need to be considered as at the very beginning, as you begin to formulate what will it mean to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Leadership. We talk about this often in our change management world, but leadership and buy-in and their support is critical to instilling a DEI program. Again, we're talking about a change management activity, even a change behavior activity, where maybe you're inserting new beliefs, new concepts into how we engage in the workplace or in your association, how you act, how you support each other, how you respect and come to understand each other. And so it's very important that we have that leader who's not just directing, but also modeling the way, that is right there in the process, involved in being a part of launching the diversity, equity, and inclusion program. So the leader has to define that culture, that vision, the values. They have to set that vision. They certainly control time and resources in being able to say, yes, our company is investing in this. We're not just putting words out there, but we're going to put real action, real budget, real investment behind this program. And then, as I said, they model the way. They model the way. They have to be at the top saying, here is our new value. Here is our new approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And according to a study by the Society of Human Resources Management and the Harvard Business Review, they state that leaders are much more likely to make DEI everybody's business, not just HR's, but something that we all participate in, that we all support and enjoy. And so I think that's really important concept, that the idea and the need and the desire can come from anywhere in the organization, but it must have leadership support. What's important is to define your DEI path forward. For many, this is your DEI strategy, your DEI approach. This is where you really have to take some time and craft what is going to work, what's going to be purposeful for your organization. So thinking about mission, vision, values, that scoping, as I said, how big and how wide can you make your DEI program? Set out specific definitions. What are the things that we're talking about? Because words matter. Words help people feel included. They help them understand things. They help the group help feel belonging, feel a part of what this initiative is moving forward. So it's really important that you take time and create a charter, create those definitions, create that pathway of how you want your DEI program to unfold. So there are different pieces here that may come into play for your strategic plan, but certainly you can see very common things for any strategic plan: goals, objectives, what needs to train, how are we going to track and monitor and measure those progress, how are we going to demonstrate accountability and tracking and transparency in our actions. It could even include, are there different incentives? Are there different awards? Are there various recognition that we have along the way? But here are just a few to help you figure out what's that right approach, what's that right strategy that you want to have for DEI. Once you have that strategy, now comes the building. Now comes the building of the action plan. Having a DEI statement is a step forward, is one thing, but putting real action behind it is what makes it a program, is what makes it continue to grow and evolve and be something that can be shared throughout your organization. So as you're building the plan, you would need to think about What are the specifics, right? What are going to be the tasks that need to be put in place and accomplished in order to achieve those certain objectives and those certain goals? Think about different performance measures. How will you know? How will you be able to see, yes, we're improving. Yes, more people feel as though they belong. Yes, more people feel like they had an equitable understanding to be able to start a process, or equal access to be able to start the process at the same time. Think about what resources are needed. Draw up that plan, that recipe of what will you need, what kind of investment. Is it money that comes, throughout the year? Is it an annual request for funds? Or do you need to do that multiple times within your organization? What kind of sponsors do you need to have on board? As I mentioned before, certainly the leadership, but are there other board members? Are there other key influencers? Are there pockets in your organization that you know that you've got champions and that you know that you need to have come along with the program to be advocates of your program? Think about how you will want to engage those and the stakeholders too that may be resistant. What's the plan to talk with them, to share with them, to get them to be involved in the program? How do you make that happen? And those can be very different depending on your organization and where you are in your DEI journey. Another key aspect that we certainly talk about in change management is how will this be communicated? Frequently, constantly, clearly, concisely. We can talk about all of those details, but it's something that's very important that you have that vision and that plan of how it will be communicated so that you know, oh, okay, we're operating in a place where we want to be transparent. Well, in order to be transparent, you need to communicate that. We took a survey. What were the results of those survey? They need to be shared so that you can be transparent. They need to be shared, and the messages do need to come from leadership, from those influencers, so that there is some credibility behind it. So that when the surveys are released, the leader says, maybe we didn't score as we had hoped, but here's what we're going to do next. And so that kind of openness and transparency in communication is just another best practice that I share with you. So as I had said, DEI is a movement, is also change management. And I tried to lay out here for you various aspects of what we've just talked about in terms of DEI preparation, and relate that back to the standard, the ACMP change management standard. And you can see that several of these steps very clearly align with the standard. The business case, the stop, collaborate, and listen, the leadership buy-in and support, those go into that change readiness, right? The pathway forward, that relates to this change strategy. Developing the DEI action plan, that relates to developing the change management plan. And then you can see I just kind of grayed out the last two steps because we're not going to go over those here today. But you can see that that very last one, DEI is a continuous effort. It's not a complete. We completed the project, we completed the change management. I don't know that that is fully possible to ever say, we've finished our DEI, right? So I just share that with you as a nuance of difference. DEI is ongoing, it is a constant, and it changes. So as I said, DEI is a function, not a project. It includes these kinds of key pieces: executive leadership and commitment, a strategy and a plan, measuring and monitoring, accountability and transparency. And when you have those in place, you have really the key ingredients to making a world-class DEI program. These are various aspects that were reported out in a survey by the Society for Human Resource Management and the Harvard Business Review group. And you can see the sources down at the bottom. They've been very clear about thinking through what will make it work, what has worked, as they surveyed thousands of organizations, dividing and grouping them into sections of leaders and laggers. And what they really found was these key ingredients, time and time again, proved to be supporting successful DEI function areas. As I said, DEI is evolving and it is expanding. There are new terms, there are growing terms, there are growing entities that are adding specific skill sets into being a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, or universities that are now certifying and creating specific degrees around diversity, equity, and inclusion. In addition, consumers and job applicants, they are really expecting more of organizations and businesses. As they research to find new employment, they're asking questions. Do you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program? Are you following it? What validates that you are following it? You know, we could all have beautiful pictures that show different groups coming together, but what really are you doing? How are you sharing diversity initiatives with your company? And for consumers, many are asking those same questions. Did this company take a stand? What do they post about this? What do they think about this? And, you know, using the power of the purse, the power of the pocketbook to go somewhere else if that company isn't supporting a diverse workplace environment. And then I share with you this other point, you know, not only is it the right thing to do to include others and find equity, but it also has benefits that continue to grow. There are many studies from McKinsey to the Boston Consulting Group to the Harvard Business Review that talks about having diversity in the workplace, having diversity on your board, diversity in your management team helps allow companies to outpace their competitors financially, to increase employee engagement. With increased employee engagement, that also usually leads to higher revenues. With happy workers, you're going to attract other job applicants, other top skilled top hires that you're looking for who want to be in a place that has a strong diversity program. When you have more diverse members of your management team or your board, you are more likely to capture new markets, expand your products, and find higher innovation revenue targets based on what you are doing in terms of a management team coming together, thinking differently, sharing and collaborating ideas through different lenses and different experiences. There are many more statistics that I could share with you about those increases in revenues, increases in attracting top talent and employee engagement. But I welcome you to take a peek at those links in the bottom of this presentation and read about those studies of how having a diversity program can really benefit your business, your organization. Now I want to share a little bit with you about the ACMP Global Diversity Journey. We started off by creating a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. And in fact, many of your members, I know Rana from the ACMP Turkey chapter was part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion group creating this statement. It really began with a need to respond to what was happening in the world. And in looking internally to ACMP, we wanted to have a statement for us to stand by, for us to use as a guiding piece in determining our actions and helping us take action and be responsive when we needed to. And from there, it continued to grow. First, we issued the statement, and then we said, we do not want to stop here. Just having a statement is not enough. In fact, I think before we had the statement, the board gave us the mandate that we would build a program after that statement. Even before that, we were taking a stand and being responsive. Several members of the board participated in a global panel about diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of our sister institutes and organizations. And then we took some steps at our annual conference to also diversify the speakers, diversify the timing so we could be inclusive of our members operating around the globe, and that we took time to have specific sessions where we could talk about diversity. All of those are some of the steps that ACMP Global took when we issued this statement. It was July of 2021, June, July of 2021. So you can see the statement here. Each of these words and phrases were carefully selected. They were discussed. They were debated. Our collaboration team had members from the United States, Canada, Mexico, Turkey, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Taiwan, Hong Kong. We had so many people joining in, lending their voice, helping us be sure that it had a global outlook as well. So you can see the words here on the screen. There are many aspects of this that had such rich discussion around acknowledging inequities, around the world, not just in one pocket, not just where ACMP is headquartered, but thinking of that global approach, that global aspect. We tried to make sure that people understood that, again, we were thinking of diversity, of equity, of inclusion, and wanting to be sure that there were different pieces of this, different steps that people could take, different checkpoints that we could say, are we creating open and safe environments? How can we measure that? And some of those metrics are still in the works right now. We also took time to say, hey, this is our commitment, but as I said, we want to be sure that we're guiding ourselves on this journey, that the statement can continue to be evolved, that we understood, again, this was not just a checking of the box, but something that could continue beyond just any one person, any one board member, any one committee. And so ACMP Global has made a commitment to check back in on this statement, to look at it again in several years and say, does this still fit us? Does this still fit the world that we are in today? Will it continue with us into the future? Or is there something we need to tweak? Is there something that we need to update? Is there some new nuance that we need to be sure is conveyed in this statement? So I wanted to share that piece with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the statement. The last piece I'll show here, though, is the actions that we have taken. As I said, having a statement is a good first step, but having real actions behind it gives it more credibility, gives it more reality to your organization. So you'll see here several things that I've mentioned and some things that are in the works. Right now, there are 3 separate subcommittees that are focusing on several actions that we hope to put in place sometime this summer. One is a DEI and change management presentation. The other is having a real policy behind our DEI actions, our DEI statement. What happens if there's an unfortunate situation where there is a violation or where people do not feel that they've been heard and included and created a safe space where they can be themselves and feel as though they belong? We're also working on creating a diversity, equity, and inclusion community on the ACMP Connect, where different topics will be discussed and resources shared as we build a DEI change management resource library as well. And so with that, I would love to open it up for any questions that you may have. If there are comments in the chat, please, I welcome them, and let's have that open discussion if I can answer anything for you or share more from my experience.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Sure.
There are some questions, and Gizem will going to ask these questions to you.
Okay.
Hi again.
Hello.
DEI, one more question. DEI is typically takes quite some time to bear the fruits of one's labor. So planning and creating short-term wins are very important. From your perspective, what kind of short wins are more effective?
Sure, that's a really great question. I think it starts with some of the beginning pieces I mentioned, forming a committee, right? Where you have that broad base, that is a very small short-term win, but it is a win. You're showing that commitment, you're showing that collaboration. Creating some sort of assessment and survey where you can gain more information that's specific to your organization. That again is a very quick short-term win where you can gather that information and be able to have some sort of response. Again, I always say if you're collecting information, then you have a responsibility to share that information back as a best practice. And so in sharing that information, have your leadership list out, hey, this was a new idea, or I did not know that. Here's what we're going to do to accomplish that. Those are some very quick ones that I've mentioned in the presentation. Others are creating separate support groups within your organization. How can you have space for like-minded individuals to come together and have various support, whether that's an LGBTQ group that can meet and share experiences, that's just one possibility. But there are many things, and I think it depends on how quickly your organization can act to put resources and investment behind the initiative. Hope that helps.
Thank you. And one more question.
Sure.
DEI is a very important issue for sustainability or of institutions or employee loyalty. However, in some cases, it can be difficult to get the support of leaders. What can we do to get the support of the leaders and to make it permanent?
Yes, good question. One thing I would say is building a very good business case, right? So certainly adding in that information and statistics around what you hope to gain for the business out of this, right? So showing that many other like organizations have achieved success, have increased their profitability, increased their innovation, and their market share, those things should speak to leaders. You know, why do we have to do this? Well, if you want to increase the bottom line, if you want to have a strong company, if you want to be the top leader in the market, this is a key ingredient to that. So I think presenting leaderships with that real business case and the real statistics behind it should speak to their business mind around, you know, wanting to increase their profitability. It's also, I think, important to demonstrate to those leaders who's calling for this, right? So if you're able to survey your employees and demonstrate, hey, 99% of the employees want this, then it's really up to the leaders to be responsive back to those employees by creating space and investing in this program. Does that help?
Yes, of course, you're completely all right. And one more question. So many questions.
That's all right.
Who should be the most effective and priority key stakeholders in order to embed change into the corporate culture?
Yeah, that is a great question. I would say, you know, it's going to depend on your organization, but I would say your C-suite, so your chief officers, need to be those key stakeholders that model the way. Certainly thinking about how many organizations are creating a separate chief DEI officer would say that that person should be accountable for how the strategy is going, how the planning is executed. But certainly there may be room for your head of HR to help embed that into the culture. You know, is it something that is on various performance reviews? Is it something that managers are measured against, whether they have a diverse team and are able to, you know, share and collaborate across different groups? There are many levels of where this can go and how it can be embedded into culture, for sure.
Thank you. And I guess last question. When we talk about DEI, we talk about religions, race, gender, and many more areas. In corporate life, which areas are more difficult to work with, and which ones are most common?
Let's see. I would certainly say that religion and various aspects of sexuality are hard in the workplace. They are. I would find that many people don't want to walk around talking about those things, you know, openly. So I find that those are harder to create understanding. They're, I would say, least talked about. I would say that most talked about is certainly race, ethnicity. I find that education comes up very frequently. Oh, that person only has graduated from in US high school. That person doesn't have a doctorate, PhD, right? That can be a bias that people have that prevents them from various opportunities. Gender still is a very big one. The percentages of women in management, of women on boards, is still very low. And then if you add in, sort of, I'll call it kind of compounding diversity, it's even less. And so, I would say that that most common to tackle is, focusing on race, ethnicity, education, gender, that those are fairly common aspects of diversity that get discussed and that people work to try to level the playing field around those items. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
This presentation and your time. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And please, if there are more questions, don't hesitate to connect with me, certainly through LinkedIn or through ACMP Connect. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your enlightening presentation. You provide us with such valuable information. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Have a good evening, everyone. You take care.